And there is new reporting tonight from the Washington Post that the president is demanding more security clearances be pulled as part of his war on the Russia investigation. The Post reporting, quote, the White House has drafted documents revoking the security clearances of current and former officials whom President Trump has demanded be punished for criticizing him or playing a role in the investigation of Russian interference in the 2016 election, according to senior administration officials. Trump wants to sign most, if not all of them, said one senior White House official, who indicated that communications aides, including Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders and Bill Shine, the newly named Deputy Chief of Staff, have discussed the optimum times to release them as a distraction during unfavorable news cycles. Wednesday, Trump canceled the security clearance for former CIA Director John Brennan, one of his harshest critics. Brennan joined Rachel Maddow this evening, and in a moment we'll show you his reaction to Trump's latest moves. Brennan, who is a senior national security and intelligence analyst for MSNBC and NBC News, was one of the first officials to sound the alarm on Russian meddling in the 2016 election. This week, the White House also threatened to take away security clearances for several other former top intelligence and law enforcement officials with links to the Russia investigation, raising concerns Trump could make a similar move against special counsel Robert Mueller. This morning, the president again expressed his frustration with the Russia inquiry.
Look, I say it again. That whole situation is a rigged witch hunt. It's a totally rigged deal. They should be looking at the other side. They should be looking at all the people that got fired by them. They should be looking at all these FBI guys who got fired and demoted. It's a really it's not us. It is a rigged witch hunt. I've said it for a long time. Mr. Mueller is highly conflicted. In fact, Comey is like his best friend. I could go into conflict after conflict. But sadly, Mr. Mueller is conflicted. But let him write his report. We did nothing. There's no collusion. But if he was doing an honest report, he'd write it on the other side.
The president's decision to target security clearances and to take away Brennan's privileges has sparked intense criticism from the intelligence community, including several former agency heads and dozens of former CIA officers. This morning, Trump defended his action.
I've gotten tremendous response from having done that because security clearances are very important to me. Very, very important. And I've had a tremendous response for having done that.
Trump also addressed the growing concern about a chilling effect on free speech, saying he was attempting to, and that it claims he was attempting to silence Brennan.
There's no silence. If anything, I'm giving him a bigger voice. Many people don't even know who he is, and now he has a bigger voice, and that's okay with me because I like taking on voices like that. I've never respected him. I've never had a lot of respect.
Now, as we mentioned, John Brennan spoke with Rachel Maddow tonight, his first sit-down interview since that security clearance was revoked. And here is his reaction to tonight's Washington Post story about Trump's efforts to take other officials' clearances.
The fact that he's using a security clearance of a former CIA director as a pawn in his public relations strategy, I think is just so reflective of somebody who, quite frankly, I don't want to use this term maybe, but he's drunk on power. He really is. And I think he's abusing the powers of that office. I think right now this country is in a crisis in terms of what Mr. Trump has done and is liable to do.
Brennan also spoke about his concerns regarding the Russia investigation.
Robert Mueller is a real national treasure. He needs to be able to continue with this investigation unimpeded. There is collusion, I think, in open sight now because of so many things I've learned since I left office, because of what has appeared in the press. You know, the Trump Tower meeting with Don Jr. and others. And I also, when I was CIA director, I didn't know that it was the day that Mr. Trump basically gave a public call to the Russians to find Hillary Clinton's emails, that in fact it was that same day that the GRU was actively looking for it. So there is collusion in plain sight.
And let's bring in our leadoff panel for a Friday night. Jonathan Allen, NBC News national political reporter, Mika Ouyang, an attorney and former staffer for the House Intelligence and Armed Services Committees, and Philip Bump, national correspondent for the Washington Post. Philip, on this issue of security clearances, John Brennan had his revoked. We hear him speaking out tonight in this same studio just a few hours ago. One of the things he talked about was trying to prevent this from happening to other former and current officials. Does he have any ability to do that?
Well, so one of the things that he mentioned that I thought was interesting is that he was trying to engage in a legal case to actually do so. And I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know the extent to which that would be successful. But it's clear that he recognizes what the threat here is. I mean, President Trump is absolutely right. Clearly, this has done nothing to silence Brennan. I mean, he was probably harsher in his language tonight than he's been at any point in time in the recent past. But what he wants to do is he recognizes that there is a particular threat. If you are someone who Donald Trump still has power over in the government, someone like Bruce Orr, who works for the Department of Justice, if he gets his security clearance revoked, that changes his career. That essentially makes it so he's not able to work, which is the point that Brennan made. And Brennan clearly wants to make it so that Donald Trump can't use this to punish his enemies within the administration itself, within the executive branch of the government, which is, I think, the broader threat. And I think that the outside chance that people are wondering about and curious about and concerned about is whether or not he tries to exercise that threat against Robert Mueller or his team.
And I want to get to that name Bruce Orr a little bit more in a minute. People may be hearing it this week for the first time. The president talking about it a lot. But John, I just want to pick up, too, on something the president said in one of those clips we just showed and Philip just alluded to there. When he talked about Brennan, he talked about the idea of, hey, he says, I think I'm elevating him here, and I want to elevate him here. This fight over security clearance, Brennan speaking out like he is. This is something the president is very intentionally doing, he thinks, to some political benefit.
Well, first of all, he likes to fight with people, and he likes to elevate people to fight with them. But I think what we're seeing here, Steve, and I would disagree with Philip on one thing. He said that the president's enemies within the administration. What's fascinating about what the president has done, and I think alarming to some, is he's using not only the informal powers of the presidency, but the formal powers of the presidency, not just to go after political enemies and political adversaries, but to go after institutions that could stand to thwart him, to go against career professionals in the intelligence community and the law enforcement community. He's basically weaponized all of the parts of the federal government that he really controls to try to beat down those parts of the federal government he doesn't functionally control right now, which means Mueller and to some extent the Justice Department, and to beat down every independent institution, whether it's the media or you're talking about the intelligence community outside of the government right now.
Yeah, and Mika, let's talk about Bruce Orr here. So the president, he revokes John Brennan's security clearance. John Brennan, former CIA director, out of the government, not in the administration. So he's somebody not in government right now. Bruce Orr, who the president was tweeting about again tonight, in government, in the Trump Justice Department right now. Is there a difference legally when it comes to revoking a security clearance for somebody who's not in government versus somebody who is?
Yeah, there is. When there's someone in government, there are certain things that would be legal to do, except for if you're doing them for a prohibited purpose. So, for example, you can't say you could fire someone, but you can't fire someone because of their race or gender, or you can't fire someone if they're a whistleblower. So the question here is he firing Bruce Orr for cause, or sorry, is he revoking the clearance for cause, or is he doing it for a prohibited purpose because he is concerned that this person is opposing him politically or saying something that he does not like that may in fact be true? So these are the questions that internally they would have to investigate if the president were to take an adverse action against a current employee.
And does he, in general, though, does he have more latitude if we're talking about folks who aren't currently in the government? Does he have more latitude? Is that an area that's gray that needs to be sort of worked out in the courts? How does that break down?
It is gray. It's also because in the security clearance area, the president has absolute power. It's not regulated by Congress. It is just his and his alone to decide. So when he starts taking these actions, the real question is, well, what are the collateral consequences for removing the clearance? Is he trying to silence people? Is he obstructing justice? Is he doing things that will have other impacts on the way the government works when we're talking about the formers?
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.
Manafort's tax and bank fraud trial is going to stretch into another week. The jury isn't ready to deliver a verdict yet. They've just gone home for the day, asking to be released early on this summer Friday. And while the jury was deliberating today, President Trump said this when asked about whether he would pardon Paul Manafort.
I don't talk about that now. I don't talk about that. I think the whole Manafort trial is very sad. When you look at what's going on there, I think it's a very sad day for our country. He worked for me for a very short period of time. But you know what? He happens to be a very good person.
A very good person who is facing 18 counts of tax and bank fraud and could spend the rest of his life in jail if the jury convicts him. Joining us now, NBC News national security and justice reporter Julia Ainsley from outside the courthouse, along with Chuck Rosenberg, MSNBC contributor and former U.S. attorney and senior FBI official. So, Julia, even though today ended a bit early, it was still a pretty interesting day. The jury asked to go home early, and then the judge announced that not only or that he is getting death threats, and he's concerned about the well-being of the jurors as well.
That's right, Katie. So right now we're in a weekend recess. They'll come back at 9:30 on Monday to continue these deliberations. What's clear so far is that this is a jury that wants to take its time. It's a complicated case. It's not like it's a case of a smoking gun and someone being in one place at one time. This is more complicated when it comes to tax and bank fraud. They have 18 counts. Some are conspiracy to commit a crime. Some is committing the crime itself. And by the questions they asked yesterday, particularly about the requirements for filing on foreign bank accounts, it's clear they want to be really careful. They also have mountains of documents, even more evidence than we saw during the trial, so that's a lot to go through. We saw some people coming out for periodic breaks, but for the most part, they stayed inside all day going over this. So it would make sense they would want to break. They need to break for the weekend. It seems one juror had an event they had to get to, so they left by 5 today. And now we, are hearing that the judge is having threats. I'm not sure if they're death threats, of what kind they are, but definitely threats to his security. He has a U.S. Marshal in the courtroom now who apparently escorts him around to secure his safety. And it's for that reason, Katie, that he does not want to reveal the names of the jurors even after the verdict comes. He wants to protect them because he says he's been surprised by the level of attention this case has gotten.
Julia Ainsley. Julia, thank you very much. Chuck, let's get into this a little bit more. When you're hearing that the jury seems to be taking its time in this case, if you're a prosecutor, are you nervous?
No. Prosecutors took their time to lay out a methodical case. The jury is taking its time to review the methodical case they laid out. And one of the questions they asked the other day struck me as really interesting along those lines, Katie. They wanted the judge to tell them of that big stack of exhibits they had, which counts did they pertain to? And the judge, of course, said, I can't do that. You have to do that. And so they're going to match exhibits to counts in the indictment and try to make sense of it. They're taking their time to get it right.
Harry Littman was on with us yesterday, and he said there's zero chance of an acquittal. Would you agree with him?
There's zero chance that I will flap my arms and fly home. There is a non-zero chance of an acquittal. I think it's very likely that they will convict. I'd be surprised if they didn't, but I would hate to ascribe a zero chance to that.
I know you don't get into the politics of this all, but if they do come back with an acquittal or if there's a hung jury, what are you worried it could do to the entire special counsel investigation?
So legally, nothing. Legally, it will continue as it should because that investigation is predicated on facts and law, and those don't change by virtue of an acquittal. Politically, small p politically, it matters a lot that the prosecutors win their first public trial. I'm sure they're feeling the pressure. I'm sure that they want to bring home what they believe is a just and guilty verdict. But facts and law don't change.
The president today said he wouldn't talk about pardoning Manafort, but he did make a point of calling him a good guy and said it was a sad day for this country that he was on trial.
In the same sentence that he said he would not talk about Manafort, he talked about Manafort, and that seems kind of odd. Was he signaling to Manafort? Possibly. I mean, it's clear to everybody involved that the president has that authority.
If you're his defense lawyer, Manafort's defense lawyer, and you're hearing that, are you thinking, hey, this could be something we can hold out hope for?
Sure. You always hold out hope, I gather. I'm sure they're also holding out hope for an acquittal. On that point, please remember, I think it's important for your viewers to know, to be acquitted in a federal trial, the jury has to be unanimous, 12-0, just like they have to be unanimous to convict. So, back to Harry's point for just a moment, I think it much more likely, highly likely, they will convict. Running the table and getting acquitted on 18 counts seems very unlikely to me.
So this is a financial crimes case. We would not be paying attention to it if Paul Manafort was not the president's former campaign chairman, and if this was not being done by the special counsel that's investigating Russia. It is a bit of a side issue for Robert Mueller's team. It doesn't fit neatly into the Russia investigation, which is why I think people are looking at this trial and looking for any hints. And the fact that a couple of bench discussions were sealed, I think there are folks out there looking at that and saying that's because maybe Gates's testimony pertains to the investigation going forward and are wondering how this trial might tie into everything else.
So the case itself, the things with which Manafort is charged, don't seem to be at the heart of the Russia interference investigation. But, and I think this is an important but, Katie, what does Manafort know based on his time in the Trump campaign and in the Trump orbit? That's what Mueller and his investigators want. This is a means, perhaps, to that end. Is it appropriate to charge him with this stuff? Absolutely. Why? Because he committed these crimes. How do we know that? Well, I mean, the documentary evidence is pretty strong, but they want something else.
Are prosecutors trying to turn him to get him to talk?
Look, prosecutors are trying to turn anybody who has truthful information that will further an investigation. So I hate to turn that question on you, but if he has truthful information that will help the investigation, you bet they are.
We're not even sure that they are trying to turn him, though. I mean, it could just be that they're trying to...
They could just be trying to convict him.
Yeah.
And it could be that he has no information about anyone else, but that strikes me as unlikely.
Paul Manafort, when he took the job, there has been, coming out in this court trial, evidence that he had financial problems. He was late on his payments to American Express. There's talk about the money he owed Oleg Deripaska, the Russian oligarch, when he took on the Trump campaign job and didn't take any money for that job. I know we've talked about this before, but it does seem like it's something that would be, if I were a federal prosecutor, and I'm not, but if I were a federal prosecutor, would make my ears perk up. I'd want to know more about that.
Well, you'd be a good federal prosecutor, and they absolutely want to know more. And I am certain that if they convict him, they will try to still get him to cooperate. Look, we're willing as prosecutors to take cooperation at many different stages. Ideally, it's much, much earlier than this. But if after a conviction, and I believe there will be one, at least on some large number of counts, he's willing to cooperate, would the prosecutors take it? You bet.
Chuck Rosenberg. Chuck, it's so great to have you. Thanks for sticking around with us today. We appreciate it.
It's a pleasure, Katie.
Enjoy your weekend.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset